Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, there's a new breed of corporate powerhouse in town. We'll look at the latest earnings from the tech titans who are positioning for greater influence over our digital lives. Also this week, retail apocalypse. Is it real? And what happens next if, as analysts say, the US mall sector is facing extinction? Plus, China's first homegrown passenger jet takes to the skies. Amazon, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft and Facebook. Nearly every internet consumer in the world is exposed to these companies in some way. Earnings out this week show just how much profit they're generating from our increasingly technology-focused economy. In 2017, the biggest tech companies are just as big as Wall Street banks as they grow their market dominance. You see, these tech titans own giant ecosystems of products that all tie into each other. Every time Apple sells an iPhone, the customer buys other services. Apple now has a cash hoard that's bigger than the market cap of General Electric. It became the world's most valuable company back in 2011. Alphabet's market value is north of $607 billion. It's the parent company of Google, which runs 2/3 of all searches in the United States. Amazon's just introduced the Echo smart speaker to encourage customers to buy more of its services and products. The world's biggest online retailer marked its eighth straight quarter without losses and has a market capitalization of nearly $439 billion. Facebook's latest figures revealed that it has 1.9 billion users worldwide. It expects to hit the 2 billion mark soon. It reported a 76.6% surge in quarterly profit on Wednesday, driven by mobile ad sales. All right, let's bring in Jack Kent from London. Jack's the Director of Operations and Mobile Media with IHS Markit. Good to have you with us, Jack. So the top 5 most valuable US tech companies all reported quarterly earnings. What do this latest set of results show us in terms of how much control the big 5, let's call them, have over all our digital lives?
I think one of the most interesting things in these results is the nature of how expansive some of these ecosystems are. So while Apple's iPhone results got a lot of the headlines with relatively flat performance there, interesting to see its services business grow, App Store sales and App Store subscriptions. So it's the variety of services that these types of companies offer, which is really an interesting trend now.
Are these companies now unassailable, so entrenched in the market that they're simply too big to fail?
I think the history of looking at the technology industry would show you that no company is unassailable. What it does mean for these companies at the top now and those looking to get to the top is that you really do have to continue to innovate. You have to invest in new products and new services. Companies can't just rest on their laurels and hope to continue to perform with the products and services they have. So you see lots of investment in new technologies, things like augmented reality, artificial intelligence. So they're really positioning themselves for future growth as well.
All right. Are these big tech platforms, Jack, crowding out competitors? I'm not saying they are, but I mean, who is keeping watch over the industry at the moment? These companies own many of the world's most valuable building blocks on which other businesses and even would-be competitors depend. Who's making sure that they don't abuse their dominance? Do antitrust regulators monitor closely enough, do you think?
That's when you look at how these companies compete, they often compete with the similar services but across very different business models. So the nature of the competition isn't just one company going up against another. Apple's vast majority of its revenues come from device sales, but it's competing in the similar services space that Facebook or Google is across a number of services. So the nature of competition is often not just symmetrical. There's different ways these companies compete. They also provide platforms for a lot of third-party publishers and developers through things like the App Store and through Google Play. So there's lots of different ways these companies work with third-party companies as well.
How did they become so big? Are these 5 companies going to dictate the next wave of digital innovation? You spoke about the need to innovate. It's no longer about startups in garages anymore, is it? Or is it? Is there hope for someone with a bright idea these days?
Well, I think you still do see a lot of startups and smaller companies growing to capture attention. The rise of Snapchat over the last few years has been one of the most notable, with a number of its products and its services making an impact across the industry. Also, if you look at Facebook, it acquired a relatively small, in terms of the number of staff, startup WhatsApp about 3 years ago for I think around $19 billion at the time. So these big companies are watching out for the smaller players and sometimes acquiring them as well.
And we talked right back at the beginning about the enormous piles of cash that these companies are sitting on. What are they going to do with all that money?
Well, they are making acquisitions as well as investing in the new products and services. So as mentioned, Facebook's acquisition of WhatsApp. It also acquired Oculus to develop its VR strategy. We're seeing lots of acquisitions in the machine learning and artificial intelligence space, and also companies like Apple and Alphabet and Facebook making investments and acquisitions in the augmented reality space as well. So companies that provide tools for things like motion capture or motion sensing to develop new forms of service around augmented reality and virtual reality. So we do expect to see continued acquisitions made by these companies.
All right, Jack, really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks for being with us. Now, US retailers are going out of business at the fastest rate since the recession. Some analysts are calling the rise in bankruptcy rates a retail apocalypse. Others say we're witnessing a paradigm shift within the industry. One of the oldest US brands, Sears, has warned that it too may have to close. More from Tom Ackerman.
A sign of the times for Sears, a brand whose management has warned may soon become extinct, to the regret of its loyal customers.
I think because they have outlasted so many other competitors, I think that just is something that I love and hold dear to.
This was a landmark year for us as well.
Long before it opened its first store in 1925, the Sears Roebuck mail-order catalog offered nearly every sort of merchandise that America's mostly rural population desired, but couldn't easily pick up.
Over 100,000 items deliverable to you, from groceries and silverware to entire homes.
Hundreds of monuments to Sears like this one are still standing in residential neighborhoods across the U.S. This house, assembled from a Sears kit on site 115 years ago. For most of the 20th century, Sears was America's largest retailer by revenue. For a time, its Chicago headquarters tower, the world's tallest building. But its advantage as a dependable nationwide merchandiser has been steadily eclipsed by competitors who focused on more fashionable and specialty items.
They don't sell the entire line that Sears has, but they each took away a piece of Sears' business. And that left Sears really struggling to maintain its place in the market.
Sears is just one of many retail store brands that have also fallen increasing victim to online sales. Levinson says the brick-and-mortar department store won't die so long as consumers still need to see and feel products firsthand. But he warns that a retailer which doesn't keep reinventing itself to suit the customer just won't survive.
Well, joining us now from Brisbane, Gary Mortimer. He's a retail expert and a professor at the Queensland University of Technology Business School. Gary, great to have you with us. There's a real buzz around retail at the moment, especially in the US. It's not a reassuring buzz either. Some are calling what's going on a retail apocalypse. 9 US chains filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection so far this year. And yet this is the time of the year when business is supposed to be looking at holiday shopping numbers and doing their restructuring. What is going on?
It's a troubling time in the US. I think we're seeing this in other global markets as well. And I think the major cause is a shift in, I guess, the way we consume products today. So while the claims have been made, the US retail market is somewhat in a challenging location and has been since the 2008-2009 recession. I think it's actually isolated to particular categories. So if we look at some of those categories, things like department stores, traditional department stores have really struggled, but they've done so in Europe and they've certainly done so here in Australia as well. Products like books and sporting goods also have struggled within the marketplace, and apparel and clothing, just basically based on the amount of proportion of competitors in the market. So we're seeing those categories really struggle. Others remain fairly buoyant though.
What's the future then, as far as you're concerned, of retail? Is what's happening right now in the US going to become a global trend?
Yeah, I think if we look at, particularly if we take full-line department stores, we think about Macy's, J.C. Penney's, here in Australia, Myer and David Jones. The way we would engage with those businesses back in the 60s and 70s and even the early 80s was that they were the one-stop shop. We didn't have category killers, we didn't have IKEAs in the business. So we went there for everything from school shoes to yarn to buying white goods, consumer electronics. But since the 80s, we've really seen a change. We've seen, big box retailers open up. Large, businesses that will cater to furniture, mattresses, bedding, certainly consumer electronics. So we've moved away from those traditional department stores. And as a result, they've really struggled to find traction in the marketplace.
How much of this has to do with technology and companies not keeping pace with the way that more of us now are shopping online? Have companies underinvested in technology?
Yeah, I think they've been slow to some extent to accept technology. And I think the biggest issue we deal with today is the growth of online retailing. And certainly the penetration of online retailing. So I think in the past, retailers saw customers as being different. They saw customers that came into store as being customer type A, and those customers that engaged online as customer type B. And fundamentally, they treated those customers differently, and I think that was an error of their ways. If we look at online penetration in the US, around about 11% of retail spend is done online. In the UK, it's certainly much higher, around about 15%. Here in Australia, around about 7.1%, and in Canada, about 3.6%. So those margins are quite small, but growing all the time. What we're now seeing, though, across the sectors is retailers really understanding that consumers will engage with their products and brands, not just in store, but also online and through social media.
Nearly 90,000 people, Gary, have lost their jobs in the US in the retail sector since October. Is that a trend that's likely to continue, do you think? Are there more job losses to come, both in the US and in the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think the area of retailing is fundamentally changing. I think that while one element of the sector will decrease, other areas will pop up. So we know that we're now moving towards a service economy. If we go back 20 years, we didn't have car wash facilities. We didn't have people that would come and do our gardening for us, look after our kids for us. So the services sector is growing, while the retail sector, because people are now engaged to self-service technologies, and we can ring up our own groceries, we can scan our own goods, we can order online and have them delivered to our house. The elements of service within retail are starting to reduce. And I think what we're seeing in that is those job losses.
Gary, good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Anytime. Take care.
Still to come on Counting the Cost, Canada's liquid gold, a fight for control of the maple syrup industry, leaves a bitter taste. But first, a made-in-China passenger jet is no longer a flight of fancy. The C919, a decade in the making, has taken to the sky for its maiden voyage. It's aimed to be China's answer to the likes of Boeing and Airbus. That C represents the state-owned Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China. And its first customers are mostly China's state-owned airlines like China Eastern. Well, even if demand for the jet remains Chinese-based, that could still add up. China's on track to surpass the US by 2030 as the world's largest commercial aviation market. And COMAC is aiming to take on the likes of Airbus and Boeing in that market. The 168-seat airliner is roughly the same size as an Airbus A320 or a Boeing 737. But the C919 still has a long way to go before it'll be ferrying passengers. COMAC will also need to show that it can operate on scheduled flights. Tom Ballantyne is an aviation expert and chief correspondent for Orient Aviation magazine. He spoke to us from Sydney about the significance of this launch.
Oh, it's a huge moment for China itself. I mean, the fact that the government in Beijing has given its full backing and put absolute priority on the development of China's aerospace industry. The government wants China to be competitive with the big Western companies that are producing aircraft. So getting this aircraft off the ground, and it was initially scheduled to make its first flight in 2014, so this is 3 years late, but it's finally in the air, so it's very important for China and for the reputation of China in this field.
Italy's national airline Alitalia has run out of luck, it seems, and cash. It filed for bankruptcy this week, a process that could result in it being shut down for good. The flag carrier has struggled for years to compete with budget airlines. Alitalia's latest crisis came after workers voted against a turnaround plan that would have slashed costs. The collapse of Alitalia also marks a big setback for Etihad. The UAE carrier rescued the airline from near collapse 3 years ago. The CEO of United Airlines has apologized once again for the forcible ejection of a paying passenger from a flight in April. Oscar Munoz was speaking at a congressional hearing into the airline industry. Al Jazeera's Shahab Rotanzi reports.
Executives from United Airlines, American, Alaska Air and Southwest testified before Congress. United's CEO made what's become his standard apology for the violent removal of David Dow from a United flight last month.
I'd like to again apologize to Dr. Dow, to his family, to every person on that flight.
Members of Congress raised several issues beyond the bumping of passengers, like the terms of carriage passengers agree to when they check a box as they buy a ticket.
Some of them are 37,000 words, 67 pages long, I would say very few passengers have any idea what their rights are.
Or why it costs so much for passengers to change their flights when it costs the airlines nothing.
United got $800 million in change fees last year. $800 million. That is a lot of money. And there's no real cost.
The airline executive said those fees were to lower fares for budget passengers, though a consumer advocate pointed out that it's no longer clear how much a flight actually costs initially because of all the hidden fees.
Every day, they are not only higher and higher fees, but new fees.
The airlines pledged to reduce overbooking and said they would never forcibly drag a passenger off a plane again. The fundamental issue hanging over this hearing, though, was whether customers are being treated unfairly because competition is so limited. Just 4 airlines control 85% of the U.S. market. Many regions in the U.S. are served by just 1 or 2 airlines.
We don't have a choice. You have a choice to not buy a Pepsi, you have a choice to not go with Verizon, or you can go with T-Mobile or Sprint, because that is highly regulated by this Congress, telecommunications. More so than it is with you all, but there's no option to not fly.
But many of the Congress members said they were satisfied that the airlines were sincere in their pledges of change. So once again, the consumers are in the hands of the airlines and their shareholders.
People who fly in the United States are members of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, lots of other political parties. You would think that they should be able to have their voices heard in Congress. And for quite some time now, that hasn't been the case.
Some legislation has now been proposed in Congress to regulate the airlines more closely. But the major consolidation of the industry occurred under President Obama, despite his pledges of consumer protection. It does seem unlikely that President Trump will now crack down to ensure shareholder profits aren't coming before consumer welfare.
The World Economic Forum on Africa was hosted by South Africa this year. The focus was on how to achieve inclusive growth for the continent through responsible leadership. But the host country's president, Jacob Zuma, is facing pressure over his reported ties to the rich. Mohammed Val reports now from Durban.
Large attendance and big themes at this year's World Economic Forum on Africa in Durban. Another gathering of world business leaders who say they're here to help Africa sort out its problems through inclusive access to technology. To achieve that goal, the forum insists on what it calls a responsive and responsible leadership. President Jacob Zuma is here with 18 of his cabinet ministers. He's been facing widespread popular discontent over allegations of corruption and questions over his ties to the wealthy elite. But he tells Al Jazeera he's here to represent the poor.
Mr. President, this conference to us is a mixture of heads of state and big businesses. Who represents the poor population here? And why
Who represent the poor
why are they
population?
unhappy with this conference?
Well, I haven't heard that there are people who are unhappy. Maybe I've been reading different kind of news.
There are demonstrations.
Well, demonstrations are always there.
So who represents them? Give me the name of someone, just one person.
Who?
The name of someone here.
Who elected me?
Yeah.
Just 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. I must help him.
Yeah.
Who elected this president? Are not the masses. And then who represents the masses? It's not me.
I'm talking about Africans.
Outside, protesters have been on the streets accusing African governments, including Zuma, of plotting with big international business elites to loot Africa's resources.
We are challenging the World Economic Forum that it has failed us after many years of being in operation. It has failed the people of Africa.
The poverty rate in South Africa is near 60% according to official figures. Many here say they haven't seen the promises of the post-apartheid era fulfilled. With large corporations deeply entrenched and vestiges of colonial imperialism still visible everywhere, some people say they can't trust their leaders' deals with Western partners at the forum.
They talk left, but they walk right. And you can tell that by virtue of the kinds of men that are here in Durban. King Mswati of Swaziland, Yoweri Museveni, Edgar Lundu from Zambia. These are people who are absolute oppressors in their countries.
Over the years, opposition to the World Economic Forum in poor countries has grown louder, while the organization's global reach has only got bigger.
We'll top it all off this week with some maple syrup, Canada's economic and cultural mainstay. Quebec province produces 80% of what's consumed around the world, largely through a strict system of quotas and price controls. But as Daniel Lack reports now from Oka near Montreal, some farmers who want to opt out are facing huge fines.
Okay.
It takes icy cold nights and warm spring days to make the maple trees flow, with the sap that Harold and Nicole Varin turn into maple syrup. Now Nicole's defiance of Quebec's strict syrup cartel has them facing huge fines and worrying that their daughter may never have a chance to run the family business.
Next year it's gonna make 100 years that Varin is in this land, so it's very important. I make this fight to give her freedom. When we start, we were free. Okay, la couleur elle change là, hein?
Most of the liquid syrup they make is sold by law to Quebec's Agricultural Federation, which controls the market. But Nicole also makes maple candy and other sweets to sell independently. That's landed her and dozens of other small producers in expensive legal battles.
I think it's up to the Federation to take the leadership to find a solution, because it just doesn't make sense for small producers like that to be sued by their own federation for $500,000.
The Federation buys almost all syrup produced in Quebec and negotiates market prices. Some is set aside here in what's called the World Strategic Reserve, tens of millions of liters stored in high-security warehouses as a buffer to keep prices stable. The Federation says it has to fight people like Nicole Varin for the good of all producers.
At the end, if those producers are making living out of not following the rules, other producers are going to say, oh, they are doing so, I will do so. And at the end, the rules won't work because nobody's going to follow them.
For now, at least, most producers in Quebec support the way their product has been handled. They say that's why their market is growing and they're tapping more maple trees and producing more syrup.
This pumping station, they call it a relâcheur.
That's certainly the feeling here at Norm Urbain's maple syrup operation. He's expanding, installing electronic monitoring on the pipes that collect the sap. He says he wouldn't be in business if it weren't for the strict rules he follows.
20 years ago, there was no future in this industry. People were cutting their maples down because there was no value for maple syrup. And now everybody wants to get into the bandwagon. Something must have been done right.
Those who are fighting the Federation in Quebec say they're prepared to take their battle to the Supreme Court of Canada. Others say a system that has led to local syrup dominating the world market is well worth keeping.
So good, c'est bon. Wow.
And that's our show for this week. Don't forget, though, there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our webpage, which has individual reports, links, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us via Twitter. I'm at @Finnegan. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you can do, or you can drop us a line. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.